Long before it was a legal defense, in the 19th century, the global trans panic began. Although it had no single beginning or architect, traces of its emergence are archived in the northwestern provinces of colonial India. Like all the subdivisions of British India, the NWP was more of a wishful declaration than a proof of colonial power. For over a century, the British East India Company's military and economic power crept across the subcontinent, making India a bloated corporate ploy. As a result, British sovereignty was weak. To maintain power, British officials relied enormously on Indian elites. Hundreds of princely states were allowed to retain their customary authority, and the British cultivated a growing middle class of Indian functionaries educated in English. Still, the gap between lines on a map drawn in London and reality on the ground was enormous. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion rocked the region. Indian soldiers recruited to maintain colonial order mutinied, and the British effectively lost most of the north. Only after months of vicious fighting did the British manage to regain military control. Fearful that their position remained insecure, British India was formalized as a colony under the Crown, dissolving East India Company rule. The northwestern provinces, one of the most staunchly anti-colonial regions during the rebellion, were an administrative result of the anxious consolidation. British officials feared they might lose the NWP again, especially because they didn't know much about who lived within its borders. As such, administrators became convinced they needed to pacify Indian society to avoid future rebellion. It was in this context that the British trans panic in India took root, but its initial spark had come in 1852. That year, a Hijra named Bura was murdered, and her lover Ali Buksh was charged with the crime. Colonial officials weren't at first certain what a Hijra was. The occasional European traveler had written about them, like Balthazar Salvins in his 1810 description of a Hidgra, whom he classified as an hermaphrodite. Salvin's entry in a book of Indian ethnological types railed against people he described as a vile class of beings, whose life is an outrage to morality and common decency. What was their crime? Living as women, having been born male. Some Hindus, wrote Salvins, believe that they are really born in this state, but it is certain that it is inflicted on them in their earliest infancy by their parents. He also remarked on their visible presence in public and at important moments in family life, like the birth of the child. In Salvin's estimation, Hijras infest as vagabonds the streets and bazaars. In truth, Hijra history is extremely long, complex, and difficult to reconstruct. But in the mid-19th century, Hijras were found throughout the subcontinent,